Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. So a really interesting set of hotfix notes has appeared recently, detailing an extensive series of nerfs to Hellfire Citadel's normal mode. Now by the time this video gets out, it will be a day or two old news, but that's fine because the wider discussion about boss mechanics and tuning and what that could actually mean for the future is far more important than just a few nerfs, especially how it might pertain to Legion. In case you don't know, I will flash them up so you can take a look. Rather than the normal percentage nerf to a mechanic, what they have essentially done is flat out remove a number of mechanics from the raid, thus reducing the complexity. Now, reactions to this have been rather interesting, and oddly enough, a few minutes after I posted my thoughts, lead designer Ian Hazacostas posted his in the forum, and we essentially seem to think along the same lines. Now, this piqued my interest because of where that thought might actually lead in terms of raid design for the future. Currently, they design a full boss encounter for heroic mode, and then they reduce the numbers for normal and add in a few more mechanics for mythic. LFR sometimes has mechanics removed, but usually they just nerf them into obsolescence. With LFR, this often results in fights being rather hazy. There are loads of visual effects on screen which, on normal through mythic, would have a real effect on a fight. On LFR, they do not, meaning that the visual indicators of a fight's mechanics are essentially stripped of causality. Simply put, the fights look the part, but because they don't do that much to you, you don't really pay attention. I think this is one of the primary reasons why people don't actually learn from LFR in World of Warcraft. A similar sort of thing happens with normal mode, though of course the mechanics do matter there if you are in the appropriate gear, and if lots of people fuck up, you generally will die, which is as it should be. Now, as World of Warcraft has gone on, the amount of complexity and the number of mechanics has very much increased. Now sure, playing our class might be a bit easier after they strip things down, and we have far more meta knowledge, but a lot of the encounters have got more complex as times went on. Now this gets us onto the topic of numerical difficulty and mechanical complexity. Numerical difficulty is quite simply just how tightly tuned an encounter is. If standing in the fire kills you once, then it's more numerically difficult than if standing in the fire twice is what it takes to kill you. Mechanical complexity, though, is a bit different. It's how many mechanics there are in a fight and how many sort of interactions those mechanics create. Both of these different kinds of difficulty, well, they give rise to difficulty, but I would argue that one is perhaps a little bit better than the other, at least for anything below heroic or mythic. If you have a lot of mechanical complexity, i.e. there is a lot of stuff going on, but very low numerical difficulty, i.e. it doesn't really do that much, then you've got a fight which is a confusing mess in which you don't learn that much. For an example, LFR. It's not great gameplay, and it certainly doesn't help people learn. Given how they are removing mechanics, rather than just nerfing down the numbers, it would seem that as well as being concerned about the actual success rate of groups, Blizzard maybe do think that normal mode is getting a little bit too close to having loads of mechanics that don't mean a great deal, because they've removed some of the excess mechanics, so hopefully the core of some of these fights is what's really going to, I suppose, shine to people. Imagine this, a fight on normal has one or two less mechanics, but the mechanics that remain are still fully deadly. Now, as an introductory raiding experience, that is very effective for learning. The threat is made more clear, as is how to avoid it. I think we almost know that this works based on, well, most of Highmall. Many of those encounters have a small number of mechanics which lead to fun and interesting sets of interactions. They emphasized many of the core tenets of raiding. As an example, it taught you group formation for Butcher, it taught you a lot about not standing inside the crap in Kargath, and Kargath also taught you how to spread, getting out of the way for the magic dude as well. There are lots of very core things there that were reinforced, and if you fail the simple mechanics in Highmall that are extremely clear, you're going to have a bad time. Luckily for my guild, of course, there were two ludicrously sexy hunters doing all of the hard work, but still. You know, I'm not saying this stuff was super hard because it was quite easy. What I'm more saying is that the threat was extremely clear, and the sort of causality of the mechanics that was there was again evidently clear to players in such a way that it's really easy to learn from the likes of Highmall. All of this brings me back to the changes that were made earlier this week. Much of the sentiment that I hold was echoed by Ian, who succinctly said that keeping mechanics and simply nerfing the numbers reduces clarity. He then went on to say that in the future, they would like the jump from normal to heroic to feel a bit more like the jump from heroic to mythic, i.e. the tuning is slightly tighter, but also there are additional mechanics. Overall, I think this would lead to World of Warcraft's normal mode being a more friendly environment to lower skilled players, and one that is far better at equipping those players with the skills that they need to become better players. This brings us on to LFR. As I said earlier, it basically just falls foul of the line between numerical and mechanical difficulty. It's an annoying and confusing mess. If normal mode was made both easier, but with also more clarity, then you've got to start wondering what the point of LFR is. Now, I'm sure that there are going to be people piping up about my grand agenda to remove LFR from the game. Well, yeah, you're partially right, well done. Removing LFR and tweaking the rest of the content would lead to a gameplay experience that is more close to the highly successful model of Wrath of the Lich King, an expansion that I think very clearly held the casual interest. I've already covered most of that stuff, so rather than repeat myself, I'll post a card linking to that video in the top right of your screen. Now, I often talk about Blizzard fixing symptoms and not problems. Well, with normal mode, their symptom is completion rates being below their internal targets, and the effect on raid teams that invariably is going to have, such as teams breaking up and people leaving. The direct fix to that is just to nerf the numbers so that the mechanics don't kill people, so that, basically, the success rate increases. Perhaps the problem is that throwing a heroic number of mechanics at a normal raid team isn't really the best way to do things, and to fix the core problem, what you actually need to do is remove what isn't needed and reinforce the core of the fights, perhaps maybe even increasing the difficulty of the few mechanics that are left. A fight with lower complexity and decent numerical difficulty is one that I think will teach people quite a bit. Now, when you look at the grand scope of things, having robust dungeon content and then going into a normal mode that is more capable of teaching players would overall be a pretty great change. And when you look at patch 6.2, you can see that they have essentially done that. The fastest way to gear up is in-group content via Mythic Dungeons. If you get Warforged, then it actually drops gear, which is better than the normal mode stuff. They have basically made LFR obsolete to the gearing process as of patch 6.2, and certainly it was a bit less important than it was in Mists of Pandaria as of Warlords of Draenor's launch. In light of all of this, I think it's very plausible that Blizzard might make the ballsy decision to remove LFR from the game. They are certainly positioning normal to be a very effective replacement, which would complete, I think, a lot of the goals of LFR and fulfill LFR's initial target audience, which was basically friends and family raiders. So it leaves us thinking, what is the need for LFR when they have a better alternative? Assuming they would pair the announcement to remove LFR with the talk about how they are going to use that as a way to improve the quality of the pre-raid experience, I can see it going down quite well. It would certainly get them out of a few tricky situations in terms of LFR undercutting content and having rewards that are above its level of challenge. I do have a slight concern about how much this setup involves repeating the same raid at varying difficulty levels, though I suppose that is an issue currently in the game. I suppose I would rather have a number of 1 or 2 boss raids around the place that are a little bit easier, but for now I think this is absolutely a net positive. Hell, if Legion is going to bring more class identity, more of a focus on dungeons, and more a focus on endgame content, as well as refactoring these raid difficulty modes, then I can see myself being decently excited for its endgame. I think they've certainly got a lot of data, sentiment, and feedback to learn from, so let's hope they manage to look past the systems and really fix the problems that are at hand. Anyway, there are my 2 cents on what these nerfs could potentially signify for the future. Overall, it is a good idea, and I definitely think they have a lot of potential for making this a really good part of the game. Anyway, that's it for me. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to talk about it more, hit me up on Twitter, and I will see you next time.